Hello everybody and welcome back to more Sins of the Father. I just wanted to say a few things before we started. First of all, thank you very much for the lovely messages that I got about the video yesterday. I got a couple of lovely comments and got some things passed on to me from my husband, from one of his friends. Hi Jade. Um, it was lovely, thank you. I like hearing nice things even though I'm terrible at taking a compliment. So today we are going to carry on where we left off yesterday. We went back to the past and we got introduced to our main character, Martha Valentine, and a little taste of the situation that she's walked back into. We're going to do 3 chapters today. They're relatively short, and I had a choice of whether I was going to do 1 chapter and it would be really quite short, or 3. Not 2, 3, because there's something that ties in the second 2 chapters that I'll probably talk about at the end. So that was my options, and I thought 1 would be too short. So we're gonna pick up where we left off. Chapter 3. In the diminishing evening light, the Marytown Art Gallery cut an impressive silhouette. Situated at the end of a rolling set of public gardens, flourishing with wildflower beds, it was constructed from classic white stone blocks that had battled and beaten the elements, proudly beckoning the public to come forth and discover as if it were as majestic inside. The glass dome roof had a flagpole pushed through the apex like a lone candle on a birthday cake. The entrance was set into the front of the building, behind a shelter of enormous columns, which could be reached ascending 3 steps that were so wide they could have been called ledges. Martha pulled open one of the reinforced glass doors and stepped out of the rain into the airy spherical foyer that utilised the underbelly of the huge glass dome as its ceiling. Ornate sconces graced the walls at precisely measured intervals, atmospherically illuminating the deep alcoves that fringed the room. Bronze busts had been set within each space, staring blankly out as if to greet their new guest with a scrutiny that she couldn't help but feel uncomfortable under. Eerie. Before she had an opportunity to reconsider and escape, Martha found herself confronted by a tall, wiry young man that reminded her of a toy soldier puppet whose strings had been cut but had never lost the ability to stand to attention. Donning a uniform of black trousers, a pressed white shirt, and smart burgundy button-down waistcoat, his demeanour was professionally affable as he greeted her with a clearly well-rehearsed speech about the wonderful Marytown Art Gallery, informing her that the museum was closing within the hour, but should she wish to venture inside, she could feel free to browse at her leisure and maybe visit the gift shop, should she so wish. Actually, she replied, hating to derail the enthusiasm, I'm looking for Amanda Ford. I was told that she was working here. Amanda's down in the studio, he informed her, seemingly not missing a beat. They're not open to the public, I'm afraid, but I can go and get her for you if you like. Who might I say is visiting? Her sister. That answer made the boy visibly hesitate for a fraction of a heartbeat, but he recovered quickly, professionally responding, Right, of course, give me a moment and I shall tell her you're here. He disappeared through a set of impressively large doors and into a room filled with freestanding displays of gilded framed artworks. 2 semi-nude marble statues of what appeared to be angelic male warriors guarded the door like impressive sentries. Standing between them, Martha felt like she was being judged, but also curiously safe, like nothing could hurt her while she was under their watchful gaze. Left to her own devices, she slowly eased her way in past them, and meandered around the main exhibition hall. Having never been a comfortable member of the artsy-fartsy world that her deceased parent and now sister thrived within, she could appreciate the unique collection of art, ceramics and sculpture, but could hardly go as far as to call it wonderful. She had always found it pretentious, and would deliberately act out if Mr. Ford had a business function at the gallery that required his family to accompany him, until he would brusquely demand that she go find a muddy hill to roll down instead. She'd always been such a disappointment in his eyes. Off the main hall were smaller exhibition rooms. Martha found herself aimlessly drifting into one that had walls painted deep blue, almost completely flanked by display cases. A wide, bird's-eye painting of a modest castle surrounded by hills adorned the wall opposite the doorway. Hung above it were 2 crests, first depicting a small bird picking a plum-like berry from a barren branch, while the other boasted a masculine hand clutching a single blood-red rose. In between the crests scrolled the words, Marytown, established 1799. Martha rolled her eyes at the display. Such local pride had always felt overtly pompous. Sure, the town had history, and not all of it was as dark and twisted as she had come to learn, but the boasting just felt a bit too forced, like the machinations of a theatre magician making a spectacle of his act to distract from the lie hidden behind all the sequins and the flashy lights. Something was amiss. If you watch closely, you might see the sleight of hand that made up the trick. It's just an illusion. The display cases were meticulously packed with antiques, ranging from intricately carved bowls and spoons to small pieces of artwork, from figurines to weaponry. A dagger in the second case on the left caught Martha's eye. Sheathed in black, visibly personalised embellishments sparked off the elaborately crafted silver hilt. The letters E.B. were carved deep into the handle, the blade so shiny and pristine that Martha was almost certain that it had never been used in battle, much less to hunt. Such a waste of a good sharp blade. In the adjacent case, amongst many other trinkets, there was a small painting the size of a postcard. Set carefully into a thin gold and black frame, it depicted an astonishingly beautiful noblewoman standing on a hillside, gazing out over the small collection of buildings with a winsome look on her face. She wore a long, flowing pink and white gown, and her delicate hand was raised, curled up by a heart, prominently displaying a beautiful and expensive gold ring upon her dainty finger, a mirror of her flowing blonde locks. The bright light of the display case seemed to pick out the precious metal, making it shimmer, mesmerizing, almost like it wanted to be seen. Enchanting, isn't it? The deep masculine voice that spoke out from somewhere over Martha's shoulder caused her to startle. Spinning around almost on instinct, she prepared to confront the flagrant intruder upon her alone time with violence, but momentarily found herself dumbstruck. The man behind her was exceedingly handsome, wearing a smart pair of charcoal trousers and a matching bespoke-fitted waistcoat over a pressed white shirt that hugged his broad shoulders. The sleeves were pushed up a pair of strong, tanned forearms, and the open collar revealed the hint of a solid chest, sprouting hair as dark as the short crop atop his head. Similar stubbled hair decorated a heavily defined jaw, masking a slight dimple within his chin. His full lips curved into a smile that seemed genuine but felt curiously wicked at the same time, matching an intimidating hint of darkness in his smoky grey eyes. He spoke again, softly. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you." "You didn't," Martha quickly retorted, frowning deeply. The man appeared to stifle a small masculine chuckle, amused by her response. An act that appeared to be pleasantry, but it irrationally annoyed the hell out of her. Holding a narrowed stare for a moment longer than was probably necessary or polite, he graciously said, "Still, I apologise regardless." With a disinterested shrug, Martha turned her attention back to the display case that she'd been happily browsing. "Thank you very much." She didn't want to be rude, but this was not the time for polite, unsolicited conversation with a stranger, no matter how good-looking or soft-spoken they might like to think they were. The man, however, didn't seem perturbed by the rebuttal, nor did he take the hint. Looking past her, he gazed into the glass cabinet and commented, "It's so easy to get lost in these exhibits. At least, I often find myself drawn to them. Small fragments of history. Each piece holds more memories than any human could uncover. All so incredible and meaningful in their ways." He glanced at her side on. "Do you not think?" "It's just stuff," she said flatly. "Old, pretty, but stuff nonetheless." The man raised an eyebrow, giving her cynicism a consideration that seemed part doubtful, partly intrigued. He pressed on, seemingly decided to pursue the uninvited conversation. "Well, all of this pretty old stuff that you can see on display in this particular room was donated to the gallery from the Blackthorn private collection. The exhibit represents the very eclectic personal taste of the man that founded Marytown, and contains many personal items that once belonged to him and his family, recovered and restored locally over much time." Martha didn't say anything. In spite of herself, she found her eyes lingering over the old, pretty things that were on display. It was remarkable to think that they'd once been utilised by people in their everyday lives, Weird to think that they were, some 200 years later, considered antiques. A quirky interest for people to come and view in a museum, try to impart their lofty pearls of wisdom upon. In our mind, it resembled an amusing image of display cases filled with hairdryers or flat-screen televisions in another 200 years. Small fragments of history donated to posterity from a private billionaire's collection of amassed everyday crap that hadn't gone rusty. Ooh, how incredible. There are similar rooms to this one on both the east and west wings of the gallery. The stranger carried on talking to her, taking full advantage of the opening presented to him. All exhibiting pieces from the Blackthorn collection. Antiques of all kinds, paintings and sculptures. Edward Blackthorn, as well as being a highly renowned industrialist and philanthropist, was quite the collector. He adored the bold simplicity of British art, having one of the greatest collections of Wedgwood earthenware in the world, but he was also fascinated by the French Revolutionary art, the sculptures of the Romans and the ancient Greeks, and he was not simply a collector. The room adjacent to this one boasts a lot of original work created by Edward himself in his youth and later years. The one beyond is dedicated to his collaborations with his mother, Louisa Stanley. Martha found herself politely nodding along, silently urging the man to continue, though she was unsure why. As the eldest daughter of one of the area's most prolific art dealers, none of what she was being told was news to her, but hearing it all over again, or stood surrounded by the physical remnants of the life who had created it all, she couldn't help but feel an allure that had long escaped her, pulling at her from somewhere within. None of this mattered. She certainly hadn't visited the gallery to browse or be given a fresh lesson in local art history by a complete stranger. However, it was hard not to be drawn in by it all, to feel enchanted, just like he had said. By his untimely death, the man continued, Edward Blackthorn's collection had become nationally infamous, boasting well over 25,000 pieces from all over the world. A lot of it was snapped up by other art lovers following his death, and it was very difficult to track them all down and recover it intact. He let out a sigh what sounded and felt a lot like despondency. There are some pieces that have been lost, perhaps damaged completely, but it's been a personal mission of the gallery to restore the collection to its former glory under one roof, back at its rightful home where it all belongs. It's a thankless and painstaking task at times, but I like to think it's getting there. Again, Martha shrugged, though it was perhaps not as apathetic as it had been before. What she'd been told sounded remarkable. It was hard to deny that. She wasn't sure she could afford to get sidetracked by it all. Again, this was not why she'd come back to town. Right, the man nodded to himself, lips pursed as he made a swift assumption. I forgot that this is just old pretty stuff to you. Martha's eyes narrowed sharply. Are you mocking me? Mocking? No, he asserted with a small, seemingly sincere shake of the head. On the contrary, I'm used to conversing with people who have limited knowledge when it comes to art. I would not think any less of you for your ignorance, but I have to admit, I don't think you're as uninformed or uncaring as you'd have me believe. I don't particularly care what you believe about me. No, I don't suppose you do, he retorted, arms folding across his chest, a bold gesture that any body language might have called defensive, only it didn't quite match the defiance in his dark eyes. The gallery is closing shortly, though. Is there anything else you'd like to express no discerning opinion about? Momentarily taken aback, she asked, What, you work here? Yes, I think you could say that, he grinned, clearly proud of himself. I'm the curator, the owner. The gallery is mine. Martha frowned deeply, thinking back to her enforced childhood visits. Whatever happened to Mr. Hesketh, the previous owner? A glimmer of renewed interest sparkled in the man's dark eyes as he replied, Mr. Hesketh retired 6 years ago. I purchased the gallery from him, and I've been running it ever since. He cocked his head slightly to the side as if curious. Did you know him? She shook her head. Not really. The curator stared at her for a long time, again a little longer than was comfortable or necessary. Martha understood the silence, an opening offering her to expand upon her short and perfunctory answer. Of course she never would. It was no longer in her nature to share, and she had no intentions of opening up to a stranger, no matter how intent his charcoal eyes held her at a deliberate and obvious rebuttal, especially now. The most he was likely to get was a tirade of annoyed expletives if he pressed her further, a discourtesy that so far she wasn't convinced he'd done anything to deserve. Thankfully, she was quickly granted a reprieve from the curiously intense impasse. The young greeter that had welcomed her into the building was back, suddenly hovering in the doorway of the room, and he was not alone. Martha's heart leapt up into her throat. Amanda. The young woman who was now standing only yards away was a decade older than the little girl that Martha remembered, but there was no mistaking her identity. As blonde as her estranged sibling was dark, Amanda had always been the golden girl of the family, the apple of her father's eye, and it was evident that over the years she had blossomed into a woman that both of their parents would have been extremely proud of. The fruit that had remained nice and close to the tree, while the other had been bruised and kicked far, far away. Amanda's hair was pulled into a loose, high ponytail that was long enough to curl into soft waves over her shoulder, with a long side sweeping fringe. Her eyes, the same shape and shade as Martha's, a familiar trait that came from their mother's side of the gene pool, were brimming with emotions that she was barely able to contain. Her lips pursed into a tight, quivering line. Once again, Martha didn't know what to say. She'd been telling herself that once she could lay eyes on her sister, ensured that she was all right, that she'd be able to leave, return to the life that she'd made for herself far away from Marytown. But then she returned, learned of the tragedy that had befallen her family, seen her mother and felt her insides being torn in half, right through the core. Now she was dumbstruck. The bonds that she had tried so hard to forget holding her in place as if there was super glue on the soles of her feet, and the hard lump within her throat was a prison, trapping everything that she should want, let alone attempt to say. It was the man beside her who eventually broke the silence, warily asking the new arrival, "You know this woman, Amanda?" The sound of his voice broke the illusion that had gripped Martha to her core. She turned her head towards him, noting the confusion on his handsome brow. This man was a stranger. She'd never met him before, and he'd not only interrupted her as she'd been nervously waiting for her sister and mocked her for her opinion on art, he was now interjecting himself into her private affairs. For a flash moment she impulsively and bitterly despised him. She wished that he would saunter off to whatever corner of his fancy gallery that he'd emerged from and leave her and her sister the hell alone. Which was irrational, of course. The tenderness in his dark eyes as he stared across the blue exhibition room at Amanda implied that he genuinely cared about the young artist in his employ. And he was astute enough to grasp that the reunion had not only been unplanned, but awkward, deeply personal. He asked the question because he cared. Not because he was an encroaching, inconsiderate bastard. At least, it's not as far as Martha was aware. "She's my sister," Amanda replied, a tenderness in her voice. The suave gallery owner just about managed to mask the surprise in his eyes as he turned his head to look between them, once, twice, and then once again. Martha wondered if he was scanning for similarities between them. Sadly, there weren't very many of them, not anymore. Whatever he was doing or thinking, he set it aside and nodded compassionately, asking the young artist, "I see. Is there anything that I can do for either of you?" Martha cast her eyes back on her sister, who was still standing in the open doorway beside her even more awkwardly composed male co-worker. It was clear by the way that her arms were nervously hanging down by her sides that she was unsure of what she was supposed to do. There was an energy twitching beneath her surface, happiness, excitement. It was there, mixed in with the surprise and whatever other emotions were conflicting her at the moment. Martha tried her best not to feel them, as if they were her own, but she couldn't help it. The whole situation was beyond tense, and it was not getting easier. "I think we need to talk," Martha spoke directly to her sister. Amanda smiled softly, nodded immediately. "I'd like that. In private. Please." Okay, so that's chapter 3. Just going to get a quick drink. So, we have met Amanda and Amanda's boss. Interesting fellow. We'll carry on. Chapter 4. The studio in which Amanda worked was located in the basement of the Marytown Art Gallery, spacious and open, crammed fit to burst with canvases and supplies. Some of the tall, wide frames were swathed with huge dust sheets, hiding the canvas beneath, while others lay bare yet to be decorated. Few artworks that were on display were so breathtaking that Martha stopped and stared, mouth slightly ajar. One in particular caught her eye, a large landscape of a surreal autumnal hillside with luscious fields of fading yellow grass in the background. A bare tree stood to the right-hand side of the vista, stretching branches like arms across to the other trees that were sparsely adorned with red and orange leaves, as if it craved their vitality. Around the base of the tree were bushes of pink and white and green, beautiful. "These are yours?" Martha asked her sister, who'd moved nervously into the workspace. She nodded in response, biting her lower lip as if there were a lot hanging upon the opinion that was sure to follow. "They're beautiful. You're very talented." Amanda glanced down at her feet, then wrapped her slender arms around her body. In her form-fitting, paint-splattered t-shirt and faded ripped jeans, she looked much younger than her 19 years, young and very vulnerable. Martha wished that there was something that she could do or say that could make it better, and yet again she was at a loss. She didn't want to have to keep trying to make small talk, but she needed to say something, fill the void. "Amanda," she started, not knowing how to continue. "I'm glad that you came," the younger girl leapt in, enthusiastically taking hold of the conversation. "I was really hoping that you would." "Of course I came." "I wasn't sure if you would get my message. Mum always said that if I needed you and I wished really hard for it, that you'd hear me, and if you could, you'd come back. I wish for it so hard, sometimes. Many times. I needed you, but it never worked." A hard lump of regret formed in Martha's throat, then settled very heavy in her stomach when she swallowed it down. If there was anybody that she wished she could open up to, explain to, it was Amanda. But it was impossible to put into words all that she'd experienced since they'd last shared a room. 13 years. Amanda had just been a child, barely in school and definitely still in pigtails. Now she was an independent young woman who, through no fault of her own, was going through absolute hell. There were no placations that could possibly be enough for the guilt that Martha felt. Instead, she assured, "I'm here now." As if she'd been waiting for an opening, Amanda launched herself across the cluttered studio and almost knocked her older sister off her feet, in a hug that was so unexpected as it was earnest. The abrupt physical contact was shocking, and Martha couldn't for the life of her think of how she was supposed to react, and so remained very still, afraid to betray her discomfort unless in the moment. Her sister needed this. She could do this. For Amanda. After what felt like a small eternity, the emotional whirlwind that was the younger forward sibling stepped back sheepishly. As she raised her eyes to look upon her sister's face, she hesitated as if noticing something that surprised her, caught her off guard. "What?" Martha asked nervously. "You look exactly like Mum, when she was younger." She laughed softly. "I've been told that." "Really?" Amanda raised a quizzical eyebrow. "By who?" Martha hesitated, sighed heavily. "I wish I knew how to answer that, how to explain so many things to you about my life." Amanda attempted to shrug the response off. "It's all right." No, it wasn't, but Martha couldn't be sure how she could make it right without opening another vortex of complication that she'd never be able to close again. She smiled softly, took a deep breath in, then back out. "I went home. I saw Mum." Amanda frowned deeply. It didn't suit her soft, delicate features, and Martha felt like an evil witch for dropping in and announcing and intruding upon her, in which was undoubtedly her place of sanctuary, where she could temporarily get away from the tragedy that had befallen her at home. While the heartbreak should have been deeply personal for Martha too, she simply hadn't been there. The burden of grief had been thrust upon the shoulders of her sibling, and it was very unfair. She should have been enjoying the independence that early adulthood granted her, and it had been snatched cruelly away. Something that Martha could empathise with. "I'm sorry about what happened," she said earnestly, and though she couldn't muster up any personal grief for the man that had died. It was the people who had been left behind that concerned her, for it was them that carried the hardship and their lives that went on, forever changed. The tears that had been threatening to spring in Amanda's eyes since they reunited up in the main gallery spilled over, tumbling unfretted down her cheeks. They hit Martha, right in the gut. In spite of herself, she reached forward and embraced her sister, pulling her in close. Sobs racked the girl's young feminine frame. She suspected that it had been some time coming, buried within so that she could handle the strain that had befallen her. She'd been waiting for a chance to break down, and while so much about the circumstances that Martha had returned to made her flounder, she felt like this was something that she could do. Be stoic, be a rock, be the anchor for her sister's sorrowful storm of overwhelming grief. Martha embraced her sister until the crying ended. She didn't know how long they stood there, but time was irrelevant. She simply focused upon keeping her own emotions down so that she could stay in control of the sensitivity of her own internal makeup. Raw emotions were tough to be around. Even though she worked hard to bolster her empathic defences, she didn't need to feel Amanda's pain when it was so visible, when it cut so deep. She wanted to help and would do whatever it took to ease her sister's angst, but she needed to protect herself too. It was basic survival, and if she became adept at anything, it was making it through the worst of circumstances and dangerous situations intact. She'd known she was going to need all of her strength if she was going to survive here. And that was before Amanda's next emotionally charged... And that was before Amanda's next... That's not right. Emotionally murmured words registered in her ears. Yeah, it was. I was just reading it wrong. Because I'm silly. Sorry. We'll carry on. She'd known that she was going to need all of her strength if she was going to survive here, and that was before Amanda's next emotionally murmured words registered in her ears. So it was fine. My father was murdered. Martha pulled back enough to look at her sister in the tear-streaked face, searching for something. Though she was clearly still trapped in the early stages of her grief, there seemed to be no indications that she was in denial. She truly believed what she'd said. Deeply. So sure. Esther didn't say that, Martha said. She told me that he fell. Amanda shook his head. Her head. Adamant. He didn't. They got it wrong. They? The police. Martha raised an eyebrow. The police are still involved? No, not anymore, her sister said, equal parts sadness and frustration in her voice. They ruled it as accidental, even though there were some thoughts that he might have done it deliberately. But it wasn't like that. It wasn't an accident. He was killed, Martha. Suicide was considered an option? She asked, surprised. One of the detectives thought that he'd gotten drunk and jumped. Amanda all but rolled her eyes. There was a lot of heated debate over it. But they didn't know him. No matter how things might have gotten, he would never do that to himself. No, he wouldn't. He was... Her narrow shoulders slumped. Look, I don't really remember what it was like when you were here. There are some things, some memories that I have, but you're a lot older than me and different, and we were never that close. No, we were, Martha disagreed. You're just too young to remember that. Whatever, Amanda shrugged, somewhat stubbornly. The point I'm trying to make is that even though I was little, I know the two of you didn't get along. I'm not surprised that you don't seem upset that he's dead. But he was our father and he did what he could for us. He was a good man. He didn't deserve what happened to him, Martha. He didn't deserve to be murdered. Martha bit her tongue. It'd do no good to openly disagree with her sister right then. The girl was grieving and a seemingly very different upbringing to what Martha herself had been made to endure. She didn't see things in the same way and didn't know the truth. Breaking that illusion now would cause unnecessary conflict, and Martha hadn't come back for that. Very carefully, she urged. Tell me what happened to him. It was about a fortnight ago, Amanda started, inhaling a deep, shaking breath. It was in the middle of the night. I'd been out with some friends, got home late. Dad had been in the study. I poked my head in to say good night before going up to bed. I didn't see Mum. She must have already been settled herself. She called it a night a lot earlier than us, and I never disturb her once she goes upstairs. That's her time. And she always liked to have it to herself. I never minded. Martha nodded. Everything her sister was saying seemed plausible, standard fare for an evening within the Ford household. She'd rather enjoyed the peaceful hours after her parents had retired to their individual recreations. Unlike Amanda, however, she had more often than not ended up sitting with their mother while she read before going to sleep, conversing or simply being near to one another in the sanctuary of their blessed company. Bear with me. I'm not sure if you can hear that, but there's a big truck beeping outside my window. And I'm back. It's typical. Every time you try and record, I remember this from doing gaming, someone will start mowing a lawn or a big truck will come and beep or something. So, where were we? Martha nodded. Everything that her sister was saying seemed plausible standard fare for an evening within the Ford household. She rather enjoyed the peaceful hours after her parents had retired to their individual recreations. Unlike Amanda, however, she'd more than often ended up sitting with their mother while she read before going to sleep, conversing, or simply being near to one another in their sanctuary of their blessed company. Those hours had been their time. It brought tears to her eyes that Gail had continued to honour the tradition, even though her companion had long left. I woke up at 4 a.m, Amanda continued. I know that something was wrong, that he was in trouble. I contemplated going to check on him in bed, but he was still in the study when I saw him. It wasn't unusual for him to work through the night, especially in recent years, so I just went straight to the study and knocked on the door. There was no answer. He kept a spare key in the bureau downstairs, so I fetched it and unlocked the door. She paused, closing her eyes. Martha didn't push, allowing her to work through whatever mental horror was preventing her words from coming out. She contemplated offering her physical comfort again, but hesitated. There'd be time for that later. She did, however, know that what her sister naively referred to as a bureau was in fact a drinks cabinet, and it was no secret that Mr. Ford hid a lot of things in there that he didn't want people to get their grubby little hands on. He wouldn't have shared the knowledge that the key was in there with anybody, not even his favoured offspring. Seemed like the Golden Girl was a little bit more resourceful than Martha might have given her credit for. A small act of rebellion intertwined with the innocence. It was highly impressive. The study was empty, Amanda said. I was confused because I'd seen him in there, and the doors had been locked from the inside and the lamps were still lit. The veranda doors were wide open and it was really windy. The curtains looked like they were live, dancing. She swallowed hard. I knew. Before I even looked down, I knew. It took forever to cross that room and look outside onto the driveway. It's all right, Martha intervened. I don't need to know more. Amanda nodded, sighing out a breath in gratitude. Frowning, Martha pressed, Esther said that Gail found him. No, she shook her head confused. It was me. Perplexed, Martha couldn't seem to think of why Esther might lie about that, but she didn't press the issue, not when her sister was so upset. Instead, she pointed out, you also said that you saw him before you went down to the city, to the study. What do you mean by that? Oh, she blushed, as if she was suddenly embarrassed. I didn't mean to pry, Martha explained. But if you're sure that his death wasn't an accident, I'm going to need to know a little bit more. I'm not from here now, and there's going to be people that aren't happy to see me. If the police got this wrong, it's going to ruffle feathers. I'm not afraid to stand up for what you believe, Amanda, or get you the justice that you believe get you justice for what you believe happened to your father. I may not have been around for most of your life, but you're my sister. We're family. Yet nothing you've told me so far is going to change anything. Not if the police have closed the case. I'm sorry, but that's just the way it is. You don't need to apologise, Amanda said. I'm not going to judge you for wanting to protect yourself when you've come back here for me. She paused. I don't understand your life now. I don't know who you are, who you've become, but we are family. Martha. Mum. If anybody could help her get through this, it's you. The two of you were always so close, and she paused, but continued to hopefully nod her blonde head. She'll get better now that you're here. I know that she will. I really hope so. Aunt Esther has been a godsend. She's been here ever since it happened. Spends most days talking to Mum, even though she barely responds. It's tough, but she never lets it show. Just says that that's what family does. And Gail would drop everything to do the same thing for her if she needed to. Martha couldn't help but smile. She really would. Family first. Mum never accepted that you were gone, you know. So I believe. I know that she went to meet you that one time, a couple of years after you went away. The lines of Amanda's pretty face fell into what appeared to be concentration. It suddenly reminded Martha of the so serious face that she had teased her over when she was a little girl, because it was so at odds with her usual cheerful demeanour. When she came back on her own, nobody expected her to be sad. Right, hang on. When she came back on her own, everybody expected her to be sad, but she wasn't. She was happier than she'd been for a long time, resolved almost. It was like a heavy burden had lifted from her and she realised that she could smile again. Still, I think she expected you to come home, even though she claimed you never would. Martha nodded, agreeing softly. It's hard to let go sometimes. Where did you go? Amanda asked quickly before covering her mouth as if she had not meant to blurt the question out. Sorry, it doesn't matter. You're here now, that's what's important. Martha looked down at her feet, frustrated. Not with Amanda, but with herself, her past, the present, and everything in between. It was ludicrous to think that she could be here and not have to answer awkward questions, but if she brushed them off, the speculation would continue. Marytown was that kind of place. Damn it. I tell you what, she offered. At the moment, I'm not even sure that I should be here, and the reasons are far too complicated to explain. Once we get through this, I'll give you my word that I'll try and answer any questions that you have about my life. I promise. After a moment of contemplation, Amanda smiled. Thank you. Now, Martha hedged, tell me what you meant when you said that you saw your father was in danger before he died. Amanda went back to looking shy, looked at her feet, bit her lower lip a tiny bit before glancing back up. She smiled, very coyly. What? Martha pressed, still utterly perplexed. If you weren't shielding so tightly, you wouldn't have missed it. That caught her completely off guard. The raw emotions of the reunion had caused her to go into it with her toughest mental and emotional defences in place. Basic survival. But it had dulled her senses, made her unaware of something that she probably should have known, or at the very least considered, given that Amanda was her sister. They were genetically related. She was like Martha. She was gifted. You saw him, she said, unable to mask the affection in her voice. Amanda smiled broadly. I saw him. Have you always been able to see things precognitively? Since puberty, pretty much, she nodded. Her tone was prideful, but not exactly arrogant, as if she simply saw her unusual nature as an extension of the person that she was, and it was so normal, like the colour of her eyes or her shoe size. Nothing all that peculiar to witness. Nothing all that peculiar to witness over here, folks. Only your friendly neighbourhood oracle seeing the future. Amazing. Martha couldn't help but wonder how she'd come to be so comfortable in her own skin. Does everybody know what you can do? You mean Mum and Dad? Amanda verbalised her inference. Of course they do, or did. Mum knows. Dad knew about it too. And he was okay with it? Martha asked incredulously. Yeah, she replied, looking confused. Why wouldn't he be? After a moment, Martha shook her head and admonished herself for a reaction. It really doesn't matter. It's wonderful to hear, Amanda. I'm very happy that you've had all that support. Of course he's a complete null, her sister continued, seeming oblivious. He never really got it. Not like Mum. You know, when things started to happen with me, she was so supportive. I was a mess at first because I didn't know what was happening, and it got really scary. I couldn't control it at first, but she told me about you. She told me about how much you struggled, and it made me feel better. And what did he have to say about it all? You know, Dad, she shrugged, laughing slightly as if it were not a happy memory, but it befit what she'd long known and experienced of the man who'd raised her. He took me aside one day, sat me down at the kitchen table. He told me that whatever happened, I'd always be his daughter and that he was proud of me. He told me that he loved me. That must have been nice. Amanda nodded. If she noticed the resentment that had bristled through her sibling, she decided to brush past it. Smart girl. The line of questioning only led to danger. She wasn't ready for the truth about her beloved father. Maybe she never would be. Is that your only ability? Martha asked, burying her feelings. Not really. There've been some other things. Such as? I have a friend, she carefully explained. He's psychic and really very talented. He's been trying to get me to explore my abilities further. I'm not sure about it, but between us, we realised that we could talk to each other over small distances. I can hear what he's thinking at times, when he lets me. Like I said, he's very good. Martha acknowledged what her sister was saying with an interest that she decided she'd explore further to try and lighten the mood and draw the conversation away from the minefield of topics that could blow it up in their faces. Raising an eyebrow, she very carefully asked, "A friend, huh?" Amanda visibly blushed. "He's my boyfriend." "Of course he is." "He's really nice," she quickly interjected, "and fun. He doesn't take himself too seriously, but he cares, and he's been helping me a lot lately." "That's good. I'm happy that you have somebody." "Do you?" Amanda asked before quickly adding, You really don't have to answer that. I know that I said I wouldn't pry. I need to know. Are you happy where you live? Do you have support? Friends? Is there anybody special?" While one particular and definitely notable individual inevitably appeared in Martha's mind like a silhouette that she carried around with her whenever they were parted, she found herself torn between the need to maintain control over difficult things that she couldn't easily explain and desire to share something positive and personal with her sister. Her answer, when it eventually came, was as honest as she could make it, without giving anything away. "Yes, there are a few people that I care deeply for, and who care about me in return. My life with them can be difficult at times, but I've earned the respect that I feel I deserved. I have purpose, and I have commitments. I've made a life for myself. I wish I could tell you more about it, Amanda, I really do, but it's complicated. And I'm not here to focus on me. Will you tell me more eventually?" Martha smiled with an earnest plea. "We shall see." The blonde girl smiled, a genuinely happy smile that Martha really didn't want to spoil, so she opted not to. Instead, she said, "I just wanted to come and see you and let you know that I'm here." Amanda's eyes widened a little moment in mild panic. "You're staying, right? You're not leaving again?" "I'll stay as long as I can," Martha assured her. Amanda smiled, letting out an audible, relieved breath. "It's good that you're here. Things will get better now, I'm sure of it." Martha was not entirely convinced about that. Few things had ever been made better by her presence. She was not a natural fixer, however, her sister's optimism was sweet, and she tried to let it infect her too. Sadly, though, the truth was that she was unconvinced by a lot of what she'd been told. Despite what her sister believed, Martha had known for a very long time that Mr. Ford had been a bastard, a drunk and all-round terrible excuse for a parent, and she sincerely doubted that time had made any dent in his sparkling personality. If the police had ruled his death as accidental, it was most likely that he fell, or got liquored up, finally believed his own inflated sense of self-importance, and thought he could fly. Idiot. His death was of no interest in her, but she'd placate her sister and do whatever it took to make her mother better. They were her family, and she would not let them suffer in silence. She would stay in Marytown for as long as it took. Chapter 5. Just outside of Marytown, in a small rural pub called the Blackthorn Arms, he waited, sitting alone, nursing a pint of dark ale that he was never going to drink. Nobody paid him much attention, which should have been strange given how unlike all the other patrons he was. He didn't belong there amongst the workers fresh off their various menial shifts and their loved ones, joining them for some early evening libations as they chose to ignore him, preoccupied with their own mediocre existences, self-absorbed to perfection. That was one of the reasons that he'd picked the location. It was popular enough to be busy, yet remote enough to be off the so-called beaten track. Even his arrival had gone barely noticed. The tall, dark-haired gentleman keeping the bar had been cordial enough when asking him what he wished to purchase, but he had not pried into his reason for being there, despite his eyes widening ever so slightly at his remarkable appearance. He simply served his patron and went about his business, polite and professional, a job well done. The unusual customer had taken refuge at a corner table, which gave him a clear view of the bar, a small dining lounge area in the main entrance, tactical positioning. To potential onlookers, he was just another person downing his sorrows, relaxing after a hard, busy day. Truth was far from different, but they would never learn it from him. He'd sit there in silence. He would wait. That was his duty. If only he could stop remembering the last time he'd visited the area and the colossal mess that he'd made of the encounter. 13 mortal years had passed, and the memories were still fresh and clear. The events of that day haunted him, in spite of everything he'd done to make it right. In truth, he'd prefer to stay far away from these lands, but his protege had looked up at him with her big, magnificent copper eyes and pleaded with him, artfully twisting his internal reluctances into a taut, conflicting series of knots until he had not only sanctioned the excursion, but offered to personally escort her on the journey to this hellhole of a town, where it all began for the two of them. Foolish. So very foolish. As he sat his back to the cushioned barroom seat, he fought the urge to follow her into that cursed place and drag her away, by force if necessary. Glancing up at the large ornamental clock above the mahogany bar, he checked off the minutes since they'd parted ways, more than enough time for her to reach her intended destination. He found himself wondering how she'd been received, whether her deep, sorrow-filled fears had been founded. In spite of himself, he simultaneously hoped that she'd been greeted with big smiles and open arms, while alternatively cast back out in shame, so that he could finally be done with this nonsense and take her home. Her real home, where she belonged. The atmosphere within the public house crackled with unrestrained energy that only frustrated him further. Laughter, harsh and seemingly forced no matter how unrestrained it appeared. There were many within the walls of the tavern who, beneath their outwardly glib facade of freedom and merriment, suffered. A very portly, seemingly proud and wealthy man used flash, grand gestures of generosity to cover the reality that his well-known business was in crippling debt and spiraling quickly into the abyss. Another leered and smiled far too flirtatiously at a female patron who was not his wife, burying a deep and pervasive fear that this final time she would no longer be there when he arrived home. It was an old tale, persisting in each one of the souls, drinking from well-used glasses, burying something while plastering a smile upon their faces. To the one soul in the room who bore witness to their truth, it was annoying. He had never understood why humans repeatedly and doggedly acted the way that they did. Even now, when he'd grown close to another very human soul as he ever likely would, he found them weak, pathetic. They drowned in their futile human trivialities while pretending like they were just fine. It's bizarre. That he was forced to play witness to their act by being nearby was exasperating. In the grand scheme of things, his ability to sense the emotional nuances of the humans in the building they occupied was new and at times unnerving. As a skill, it was incredibly useful, and he couldn't deny that it had positively enhanced both his natural competency in battle and also his diplomatic negotiations, as well as granted him a stronger emotional bond with those who served under his command. But it was not his power that had enhanced those particular senses. It was not his sense of empathy. It was hers. They were connected. He closed his eyes so that he could better focus, reach out with his mind. She was close, but that was an imprecise term. Their bond had been tested in the field, and there could be great distances between them without their abilities diminishing. He could feel her, even when she was miles away. He only had to concentrate for a moment, and he could locate her, travel to her side, be with her. In that particular moment, she was in the border of Marytown, of that much he was certain. He wished he was able to zero in a bit more accurately, but something was blocking his mental probing. Something mystical, something dark and unyielding. He shouldn't have been shocked. It was not that great a secret that the town had been built upon oaths deadlier than any foundation should possess. But now it annoyed the life out of him. He wanted to know that she was all right, and the only way he was going to be able to do that reliably was to physically track her down, and he couldn't take that risk. Not yet. He had to stay where he was, had to wait for her return. He knew that, but it was so very tough. The need to protect her gripped him from somewhere within. His soul, perhaps? It was hard to pinpoint exactly. In all the years that had passed since they'd met, they'd been apart for small amounts of time, but never had it felt so grievous. Not even during those first few years when he'd been certain he'd lost her for eternity. It was as if a part of him was missing, more important than a limb, but essential nonetheless. All his instincts were screaming after him to go after her, head right into hostile territory. If only he could lay his eyes upon her, check that she was unharmed. Utterly ridiculous. Well, that depends entirely on your circumstances, a male voice carrying the soft yet defined tones of a local accent interrupted. Stefan snapped his eyes open, attention focused on the intruder as fast as a slaver cracking a whip. His diamond-hard gaze fell squarely upon the barman who'd seemingly been doing his job collecting glasses. He had a cloth in his hand which he deftly slid across the finished surface of a nearby table, not even acknowledging the male that he'd spoken to, who irritably grunted. "Excuse me?" "Sorry," the host responded casually, with no hint of true remorse. "You were mumbling to yourself. Thought you might have been talking to me." "I was not." Without so much a by your leave, the man shrugged and turned away, making his way back to the bar where he stacked the dirty glasses into a silver waist-high appliance and tossed the cleaning cloth back whence it came over his shoulder. Stefan watched him like a hawk for far longer than was necessary to ascertain that he didn't have some sort of hidden agenda that he had previously missed. The man was not what you might consider a hard worker, but he smiled genuinely to the next handful of people he served, and the local populace seemed to accept his slovenly demeanour, treating him as one of their own. Still, Stefan knew very well that appearances could be deceptive, and since he was loath to admit that he had indeed been mumbling to himself, as he'd been thinking about his protégé, out there all alone by herself in hostile territory, he decided that he'd clearly outstayed his welcome and found his feet, walking with a sense of purpose out of the door and into the cool, early autumnal night. He would wait outside, perhaps a little bit further up the road, away from others that might cause a distraction when he needed to have all of his wits about him. He had a duty, had made a promise to somebody who meant more to him than he could ever describe with words, and where he held from solemn vows meant to be honoured. He would not forsake his principles because he was having a crisis of control. He needed to learn how to let go, which was easier said than done given the circumstances, but he knew that he must. The truth was, he'd been proud when she'd accosted him, demanding that he allowed her to leave the mount and head back to the wolf-infested den from which she hailed. His protégée was no longer the naive, broken girl that he'd almost given his life for. She'd faced the less than favourable opinions of his brothers, the stern judgments of his father. She'd handled the truth of her origins with dignity, if not pride. She was determined but never harsh, shrewd but never manipulative. She'd physically proven her worth many times over and earned her position within his ranks. It was impressive to see that she could surprise him. So whatever she was doing... It was impressive to see that she could surprise him, so whether she was doing something incredibly risky or not, it didn't matter. She was his. If she suffered, he suffered, and Stefan North didn't suffer long. He would wait for her exactly where she had left him, for as long as it took. Okay, so that's it for today. We're close to an hour. I just wanted to round it up and say that the reason that I wanted to do 3 chapters today was because of the way that the 2 chapters ended. They ended in the same way. You might have noticed that, and there is a very good reason for that. It's a writery thing, connecting people together. I love doing things like that. So, yeah, where are we now? So we have met Amanda. We have discovered that Amanda believes that her father was killed and that his death wasn't accidental, and Martha's made the decision that she's going to stay in Marytown and figure things out. But lingering on the periphery of Marytown is somebody who's not too happy about that situation. And given us a little bit more of an insight into who Martha is now and what she is and perhaps what she's been up to. I try not to say too much. I don't want to spoil things for anybody. So yeah, 3 chapters today. We've gone almost an hour. I really enjoyed doing that. I like reading aloud. It's good fun, and it's really nice to go through the book again and see the earlier stories, because plot-wise I'm quite far ahead. So it's nice to go back and remind myself of how things all started. So, as always, thank you so much for all of the support that I had on yesterday's video. Please leave a comment or wherever this is shared and where you see it. I really would like some feedback. That would really help. Not necessarily about my delivery, but about the story, what you think, how you're feeling about things, if there's any characters you like yet, if you're it's early days and we're kind of like, I don't really know what's going on. There's mystery. So yeah, please give me your feedback and I will try to interact wherever I can. I forgot to put the link to the book on Amazon in the description yesterday. I did that a little bit later on in the day, but I'll make sure that I do that today. There will be a link in the description to where it is on Amazon. You can buy this paperback version. I think it's £5.99. It's like $9.99. I don't know. Don't know international prices. I'm quite terrible at that. But yeah, you can get that on Amazon. You can also get the Kindle version, and the Kindle version is much cheaper. The Kindle version is only 99p. So if you have a Kindle or you have the Kindle app on any of your devices, it's only 99p. You can download it, read it along with me. Skip ahead if you want to. Won't be offended. But if you do buy it, I ask people to leave reviews because that really helps me out as an independent author. I'm also going to be posting these videos to my website. I have a website now. It's www.luciejmansell.com. It's very basic, set up by Squarespace, but I'm building it at the moment, and the more I do things, the more stuff will be put on there, and this has inspired me to get to do more of that. So thank you very much. I hope to see you again tomorrow and we will continue the story. So I hope you have a good day. I hope everybody's taking care and everybody stays safe, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.